Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. The title given to me was Religious Freedom, the State of Affairs in Africa. And I think you will agree with me that if we are to talk about the state of affairs of religious freedom in the whole continent of Africa in these 20 minutes, we may stay here for the remaining 5 or 6 days and we would still not yet be done. So basically what I'm trying to do in those 20 minutes, I may not be as fluent and as influential as our dear Professor Lumumba, but I'll try to give you the essence of what we at the AU Interfaith Dialogue Forum think about it. And I'm going to locate my presentation within the context of two things which has been said since the morning. One is to start telling the African story on that issue, and I'll leave it to you to determine whether I'm well placed to talk about the African narrative, because it's very important. And secondly, it's the issue of, I think, which we've been telling since the morning. It's the issue of one of, as I said, of the African story, and the second is the trappings and the pitfalls that we very often tend to fall into whenever we talk of concepts, of ideas that are imported from outside the continent and bring over here. We tend to import it along with its Eurocentric or westernized biases, right? So what I'm trying to do is trying to tackle that issue in a way that start maybe give us some openings about how we can start thinking about it. So basically, as I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to tell you about what is actually going on in terms of religious freedom across the continent. But what I'm trying to do first is, let me start off with a prediction. You know, at the beginning of the 20th century, scholars, and especially sociologists and people who study contemporary society at that time, predicted that as societies develop, and as they develop, they achieve a number of progress here in terms of material acquisition and in terms of wealth. So as they progress, religion and religions will regress until we reach a point where we will attain a level of progress where we will no longer be needing religion. And that was expected to happen by the end of the 20th century. That was the prediction. And this was what formed the basis of a number of programs, of initiatives in developed countries. This was called the theory of secularization, or la laïcité, for those of you who are French speaking. This was the prediction. Now let me get to the facts. By the end of 1990s, where we expected to find a sharp decline in religious affiliation and in terms of the influence of religion in modern societies, what we've seen instead is a return, a vigorous return of not religion, but of a number of religions and a number of new religions, to the extent that some have called the return of the South, or la revanche de Dieu, right? So we found ourselves in a situation where the prediction that we had at the beginning of the century turned out to be a total myth. And as some sociologists pointed out, it's not the return of religion that actually poses the real problem. It is the return of the most extremist violent trends within different religious traditions. Now, this is the fact. Now, what does that mean for us in Africa? A couple of things. Number one, our societies are going to get more and more diverse, more multicultural, multicultural and more multi-faith, like it or not. Especially with the number of initiatives and programs that we have with China, with India, and with a number of other partners, our societies and our different communities are going to be more diverse, right? More multicultural, right? Now, we've started seeing it with the Chinese. We've started having more and more interfaith or multi-faith couples, right? People call that mixed marriages. And as a friend told me once, but isn't all marriages mixed because it's between a man and a woman, and so whether of any ethnicity, that doesn't really count as mixed because that was supposed to be, all marriages are mixed. Hope you get it. Right, so now, when we talk about that multiculturality, that interculturality, something that we are not really used to, but that we in Mauritius we've experienced for quite some time, we are going to have to devise ways and means and developing strategies so as to be able to cope with that. And this applies across all faith and across all religion, be it Muslim, be it Hindus, be it Christian, of all denomination, be it Buddhist or any other faith. Now, that's the first thing. Now, in terms of general remarks, what can we say about the state of religious freedom, of religious liberty across the continent? Basically, is the state of religious freedom and religious liberty, is it as it is right now? Is it good? It's not. And we need to be honest about it. Is it catastrophic? It's not. And don't let anyone who would tell you the contrary, don't let them get you to believe that it's catastrophic. It's not. It's not worse than, let's say, the Middle East or Latin America. Is it bad? I think we agree, yes, it is bad. And in a couple of situations, it can be very bad. But are we getting better? Yes, we are. Now, if like me, you've been studying what we call the mega trends across the continent, and this is something that I'm fascinated about, is looking at mega trends in terms of development indicators. Yes, the indicators, a number of them are pointing towards the fact that we are getting better. Right. Now, so what this means is that although we have a lot of work to do, the trends are pointing towards a betterment of the situation, meaning that we have a number of things, although we have a number of things to do, but we are getting any better. Although it may, because of our African context, it may take us longer, but you know, peace is something that is elusive. So we may take as much time as we can, we don't have any problem with that. Now, there's something that I would want us to focus on, which has deeper implication for us Africans. Is the fact that when we talk of religious freedom, is it something that we talk about in terms of a concept that exists in absolute terms, independent, or is it something that is interconnected or interdependent with other rights and other concepts? Because this is very important. Why? Because if we I found that in a number of discourses or in a number of conferences, when people talk about religious freedom, we tend to talk about it as if it's something that we need to have our religious freedom, and we don't care about whatever is happening around us, but that's the only thing that we need to talk about. Now, if we have that type of approach, and a very particular way, a very way of looking at at religious freedom as an absolute, particular right, without looking at other parameters, social parameters that surrounds us, we may be actually adopting a liberal approach to this issue. Liberal in the sense that, we need to have religious freedom, right? Of course, we need to have it, and we're very proud to have it. But then, ignoring any other rights may end us in, may lead us to perhaps to places where we might not necessarily want to end up in. For example, should we conceive of religious freedom because it's clear in the way it is formulated that it is the freedom to believe as well as the freedom to not believe. Now, is the freedom of not believing, does it allow me the freedom to offend those who believe? What I'm saying is, if I advocate for my religious freedom as a believer, and someone else advocate for his freedom of conscience, does this allow him to express his freedom of conscience to the extent that he can offend my symbols, my symbols that are very crucial to what makes the essence of what I believe in? A couple of examples might show you the dilemma. For example, if you may go to certain Western countries where in the name of art, you find, for example, someone having a cross in a big cross in a recipient, and that recipient is filled with urine, and this is art. Or you go to, in the name of satire, or in the name of comedy, someone, for example, depicting some cartoons with some prophets or some religious figures with their heads like a bomb, and then with some comments, So, what type of religious freedom are we talking about in this particular context? And in our context, in the context of Africa, because when we've been talking of Africanness, I've been living on the continent for quite some time, and I found that there's something very, very unique about being an African. And I think that can be summed up in that what I call the Ubuntu philosophy of life. I am because we are together. Now, in that particular philosophy of life, does it ring the same bell as to someone, let's say if I'm in Western Europe, do I understand that concept of religious freedom in the same manner where my philosophy of life is very liberal, individualistic? Does it mean the same thing? Of course, in principle, we all agree that religious freedom is a fundamental right. But as always, the devil is in the details. Do we have the same understanding in terms of how do we conceptualize it, and how do we make sense of it in our particular context, and especially in Africa, given the traditions and the philosophy of life that we espouse? I think that here there are a number of things that we have to start reflecting, and we have to start thinking about, because one thing that kept me worried is, especially when I've been talking to journalists, politicians, etc., a number of those people, the elite, come from Western universities, and unfortunately many of them have had a very westernized primary, secondary and tertiary education. So apart from the fact that the person looks African to you, the mindset, the language, the discourse is unfortunately not African. I'm sorry to say it, but that's the case. This is what I've lived with a number of what you call elite in African societies. Now, if we want to retain, and as we said, I think Professor Lubumba just mentioned it, if you've been talking about peace, if you've been talking about freedom, if you've been talking about justice, these ideals and these concepts, they come with a language and a mindset. How can you adopt a language that is submissive and expect to achieve liberation with a submissive mindset and a submissive language? It doesn't make any sense to me. Right? So this is something that I think we as Africans, we have quite a lot of work to do, and I think we have a rich tradition that could actually allow us to which we could garner, and I think Professor Lubumba has just mentioned a number of visionaries, of African visionaries from the 1960s onward, who have given us a number of pointers where we could use to actually carry on that reflection process. Unfortunately, now, I think my time is running out. I don't think I'm going to have enough time to talk about the state of affairs in different countries, but I think there are a couple of remarks that I would like to point out before I end up. So these are the challenges. What are the opportunities? There are a number of opportunities. One of them is in this convention center that we are here. I think 20, 30 years ago, in my wildest dream, I would have never ever thought it possible that me as a Muslim, invited by an Adventist, most Adventist assembly, addressing a congregation that are mostly Christian. It happened to me again in Mauritius, in the Anglican Church. So this is something that needs to be celebrated, and this is something that is extremely positive. So I take this opportunity to actually congratulate the organizers. And number two, I think the African Union, as from 2010 and then 2013, when the Agenda 2063 has been laid on the table, African leaders have had the foresight to understand that if we want to make Agenda 2063 a reality, not in international conferences, but on the ground, we cannot do away with religious leaders and religious communities. So what they did was that they got together and they said, you know what, we need to get religious leaders on board in order to indigenize Agenda 2063. And this is what they did with the AU, African Union, IFDF, Interfaith Dialogue Forum, in which I am an executive member representing Eastern Africa, me and Pastor Zerihun Degu from Ethiopia. So we are going to be meeting in November in Jamena, where we are going to have the second AU Interfaith Dialogue Forum. So this is something that is still, well, we've just developed the strategic plan. So this is something looking very positive. So I think this is another thing that we could actually load in terms of Africa. And the good thing is the UN does not have a platform for religious leaders to implement the SDGs. The ASEAN doesn't have it. The European Union doesn't have it. I think this is where Africa is providing leadership in terms of multilateral organization to tell everybody how we can actually make things happen, taking on board religious leaders. And in terms of, yes, one final remark is, we need also to be able to see that we have, when we talk of diversity, when we talk of religious freedom, we need to be able to look at what we've had in the past, in terms of our Christian and in terms of our Islamic, in terms of our, perhaps, now we started to have Buddhists and Hindus, but in terms of mainly Christian and Muslim tradition, we had the Ottoman model of millet, the millet model, which was actually a form of living together where Christian communities living in Muslim state had almost full autonomy under a federal state. We also had the Muslim Christian model in Muslim Spain, the Andalus, the convivencia in Andalusia. And even as now, when we were talking, we have a model called the Pancasila in Malaysia. So within our faith traditions, I think there are a number of models of living together, of religious freedom that are practically being implemented, of course, with some imperfections, but we can always work on it, right? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.